Howdy, everyone. Let me get you caught up on what I've been doing the last couple of days here out in the garage. So I've been working on the flap push rods that attach the actual flap to the control mechanism inside the fuselage. So the instructions for making the push rod are on the plans. Obviously, they give you the dimensions to make the push-pull tube and what rod ends to use and things like that. That's all written in the plans and in the instructions. So all I did was I made two identical push-pull tubes, and then in order to fit them to the fuselage, the first thing you need to do is enlarge the hole both on the side of the fuselage and underneath the fuselage. The way that I did it was I took the tube off, but I kept the swivel rod end attached to the flap. So all I did was take the tube off. And then you bring the flap up, and of course the rod end is not going to fit up through here. So you just keep enlarging the hole. Keep enlarging the hole until you can get the rod end to fit all the way up in here. You basically want to make sure that you can bring the flap all the way up and have it touch the bottom of the fuselage. And leave yourself some clearance, obviously, so there's no binding, because the rod end needs to swivel. So make sure you have no binding in here. Once this hole here and the hole underneath are big enough to get the body of the rod end up in there, then you can connect the rod end to your flap arm, if you will, if you want to call it that. This arm here can now be connected. And what will happen is, as you lower the flaps, eventually the rod, the push-pull tube connecting rod here, will rub on the bottom skin. And then you just file or grind away the skin until you can lower the flaps as low as you want them to go without any interference. So again, just by using the body of this eyelet, this rod end, you can take the tube off, just use the rod end, make your holes large enough for that rod end to go into the fuselage completely, so you can bring the flap up all the way and have it touch the bottom of the fuselage. Once that's complete, then you can come in, you can put your connecting rod back in place, connect it to your control arm here of your flap mechanism, and then as you lower the flap, the control rod is going to want to try to move forward. Of course, it's going to rub on the bottom skin, and you'll have to grind away the skin to make room for that rod. And as you slowly work your way forward with enlarging that hole, the flaps will go down lower and lower and lower. So at that point, you need to figure out, well, how low do I want to go? Well, the instructions say, at least for the 7, the instructions that I have, the written instructions, they state that max flaps is 40 to 45 degrees. I know there's been some debate about flap position and the number of degrees for full flaps, but for me personally, I've elected to go 45 as my max. So I still have the wings set. I still have my reference here on both wings for having the ailerons perfectly in trail with the wings. With that, as I've done before, now I can bring the flap and have it perfectly in trail with the aileron, which puts the flap in trail with the wing. With that held in trail with the aileron, which is in trail with the wing, I pick a spot, just like I've done before. I pick a spot on the flap. I use my digital level. Again, imagine the flap is in trail with the wing and in trail with the aileron. I pick a spot on the flap, I put my digital level on the flap, and I set it to 0. And then I lower the flap down all the way until that push rod hits the hole that I've been making in the bottom of the fuselage. When that rod hits that hole, the flap stops moving. Using my digital level, I read the degrees. And if it's not quite 45, then I continue to enlarge that hole, which allows that control rod to move forward, which allows the flap to continue to come down. And you just keep chipping away at it until you get down to, for me, roughly 45 degrees. Now, of course, you want a little bit of clearance in there. So with the flaps all the way down and stopped because the control rod is hitting the skin, I've gotten it down to about 46.5 degrees. But when I bring it up to that 45, my control rod has nice clearance all the way around it. And I've got both flaps set up exactly the same, with both flaps all the way down, and the only thing stopping them is the interference of that control rod. Both sides are right about 46.5 degrees. I think one is 46.5. I think the other one is 46.7. But when I do my final setup with the adjustment of the linkage and with my manual flap setup, which I'll get to later, I'll have this set up so that it stops at 45. 45 will be my max. I just want to make sure I have plenty of clearance around the control rod so it doesn't bind. So that's what I have right now. I've got the control rods in. I've got both flaps connected to the mechanism. You can see it here. You can see that that is connected to the flap. And of course, you've already seen that this one is connected to the flap. So like I said, now in this configuration, the control rod is actually touching on the bottom skin of the fuselage. So that right now is what's preventing the flaps from going down any further. And when I put my digital level on both flaps, this one and the other one, they read about the same. And at this point, bring my step stool over. At this point, I can move my manual flap lever all the way down, and you can actually hear that both flaps they hit the bottom of the fuselage at the same time. And I verified that visually, that both flaps come all the way up and hit the bottom of the fuselage at the same time. So now at this point, I need to figure out how to place the curved piece that goes through this arm, the curved piece that goes through here. I have to figure out how I'm going to get that mounted and how I'm going to notch it to give me my flap positions. You can see I've got the push-pull tube in place here for the elevator, and that's all been adjusted and set. When that moves through its full range of motion, it comes up higher than the floor. So I have to make a tunnel for that and then incorporate this curved mechanism here for this. So that's what I'm going to be working on next. One thing you want to remember with your flap control, this weldment that comes from Vans, the holes on these ends, those need to be enlarged to 1/4 inch. I didn't realize that until after I had it in place. I had to drill it in place, which was a non-event, but just be really careful when you drill that you don't go through your side skin. So before you even put this in place, enlarge those holes to 1/4 inch. So again, the flaps are in. I've got my holes on the side and on the bottom of the fuselage enlarged to the point where I can get more than 45 degrees of full deflection. And they're also big enough that the flaps can come all the way up, and that bottom rod end can be recessed into the fuselage. Both flaps, when connected, are the same full deflection amounts. They match. And when I run that handle all the way down, both flaps come up and meet the fuselage at the same time. So now it's just a matter of incorporating that curved piece, figuring out how to put the notches in it, and get my different positions set. So that's what I'm going to work on now. I'm going to work on making this tunnel piece first, and then I'm going to try to figure out how to mount the notch mechanism for the flap handle. All right, talk to you guys later.